Hello and welcome to Overcoming Self-Doubt. I'm Linda Chung, and this interview series is with an amazing array of high achievers sharing their experiences, their tips and techniques to show that everybody can be impacted by this topic. Today, I'm joined by Julie Kapsalis. Julie, hello.
Hi Linda, really good to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you today. Thank you for making the time. So let me introduce Julie to everybody. Managing Director at Chester College Group, overseeing a 15 million portfolio, Vice Chair of Coaster Capital LEP, a board member at the Institute of Economic Development, and actually if I look at your Twitter bio right now, champion for women enterprise, mother to Hector and Felix with a few at the end. So juggling a lot of different hats and a lot of different roles. How are you coping right now with everything that's going on, Julie?
I think juggling is a really key word because I think the past few months it's just felt like there's been another few balls that have been thrown into attempting to juggle them. And if I take the analogy to a different area, I think I have smashed a few plates along the way. But I also think actually this new way of working where we're at home, our families are around us, we're actually all showing our really human sides in terms of what it's like to be working from home, the fact that my kids could appear on this interview at any minute. And actually, I really welcome that from an authenticity perspective. And actually, I've seen a number of senior colleagues in quite different but really positive lights from that.
So your perspective on people have changed through this lockdown?
It has, definitely.
And has that, do you feel that it's already had an impact on how you're doing things and how you're approaching things now?
Absolutely. And one of the things from my side is with my team, I'm finding that I'm having to develop my own leadership style for how we work together in terms of supporting people, not just in terms of the day-to-day businesses and the challenges that we're all facing, but actually in terms of people's own circumstances. If they live on their own and they're struggling because they're not getting as much interaction outside of work, or they haven't got somebody that they might traditionally go to the pub with after work to have that discussion. I think it's about really understanding what people's drivers are inside and outside work and how you can support them to make sure we can all continue to do our jobs in what's really challenging times.
Yeah, and coming to the theme of these interviews, obviously, are you seeing people sort of looking like they're being held back more, that they have more self-doubt / obstacles to overcome right now?
I think so, and I think it's a whole range of things that's making people doubt or question things, and some of that is where people, and I put myself in this category, are people that are creatures of habit that like their routine, and that's part of their comfort zone. And because I think everybody in the country's routine has had to change in some way, and in the majority very significantly, that does make self-doubt, just querying, kind of come into play a lot more than it did previously, and those sort of comfort blankets or things we traditionally went to outlay some of those feelings of self-doubt aren't there in the same way, and so we've got to adapt.
Can you think of specifics? What techniques are you using more now, and which techniques are you finding less useful to you?
I mean, my big channels in terms of if I was really struggling either with a business decision that needed to be made or thinking about my career or my role on Coaster Capital Board, my sort of usual channels would be I have quite a long commute every day. I drive, and I use that probably 2 and a bit hours both ways as my thinking time. Mm-hmm. No music on, nothing. That's my reflect, kind of talk to myself, mull things over. And obviously my commute at the moment revolves around walking from one room to the next, and very difficult with 2 young children and my husband all working in the house to ever have what feels like 5 minutes peace and quiet. And I say that with love, mm-hmm. but to stop and think and reflect. And my other big channel for being able to switch off from the day-to-day and think strategically, for me, has always been my holidays. My holidays are on my passion, their time spent with the family. And of course, none of us are going on holiday at the moment. That sort of break from work, it's really easy to not be able to take breaks in the same way now.
And so are you kind of enforcing those breaks on yourself? You know, how are you, because that's quite dramatic, 5 hours of thinking time a day. Is that what you're saying? 2.5 hours each way?
That's that in total. So it's probably 2.5 hours in total.
So 2.5 hours lost. Is it so that you can recreate it? Is it, how can you put that routine into play?
I haven't got it quite right yet, but I'm trying. And it's a balance for me because my children are at home, they need me even more probably now. Small thing that I've done, I've never particularly taken lunch breaks. I now have cleared my diary between 1 and 2 every single day to make lunch, to have lunch with the kids. And whilst that's not giving me just my thinking time, it is at least giving me a break away from a screen, which we're all finding ourselves sort of attached to all the more than we used to. And then for me, this is a bit naughty, I've persuaded my husband and my 2 children to take up running so they can go out running and I can sit in the garden and get about half an hour every other day of thinking time. So a little bit of a naughty tactic to get them out the house, but it's their once a day exercise and it works very well for me.
Exactly, that's not naughty, it's smart. Love it, Julie. So that is creating different space, if you like, which is fantastic to hear. And so important for us all. The theme of mental well-being in this lockdown, it is emphasising this need to create that space. And I guess actually without it, some of the things we've been talking about in self-doubt, people haven't been as candid about. I think it's amazing that actually even this interview series is happening because people believe that it is a helpful topic. And one of the things that you and I have spoken about in the past is perceptions. Do you think self-doubt falls into that bucket of how successful women, we've talked on diversity many times as well, successful women are just juggling it all, are just doing it all? And how does that feed into self-doubt?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I feel like I've been on quite a journey myself. When I had my first son, going back almost 10 years ago, while I was on maternity leave, the organisation that I worked for was closed down. So I was made redundant while I was on maternity leave. And that was really tough because I had assumed that I would go back into, however difficult it would have been juggling, but a world that I knew. And that was very difficult. And that really made me doubt what I was going to do next. I had a young son. And that was really difficult. And the most important thing for me there was around having a really trusted group of people that I could pick the phone up to. And to be blunt, some of them just gave me a really good talking to and actually said, you've got to remember the things that you're good at as well. You've got to think about what kind of roles you could do. Don't be afraid to say to people, I could do that role, but could I do it flexibly or could I do it part-time? I was really quite nervous about doing that. And I was also quite nervous about being honest. And I know nobody should ask in a job interview about your own personal situation, but I almost felt I had to hide that part of my life. And I think one of my biggest learnings has been my proudest achievement is my 2 kids. I love them to bits. And I will never do a job or take on a board role where the importance of balancing my family life alongside that commitment can't work. And one of the first things I'll ask if I'm ever looking at a board role is, what time are the board meetings? What kind of flexibility is there? Because I think organisations need to change on traditionally always having board meetings in the evening. Because otherwise, every time I have a board meeting, I have to pay £50 for childcare.
What's coming through quite strongly there, Julie, which I love, is understanding your own value. And that's absolutely something when people are feeling self-doubtful, they forget, you should want me on this board. You should want me to be part of this. And actually my value to you is such that actually you should find a way to deal with this being a real concern for me, or a consideration at least, if not a concern. It's a great reminder to not forget value, not forget your ability to contribute when you're approaching a situation.
I have an executive coach, and when I've had real wobbles in terms of my own self-belief, self-confidence, I know that she will strip everything back to looking at what's important. And one of my, I always believed actually it was a strength until she kind of pointed out that maybe it wasn't, was I always prided myself on saying yes to everything. And I just found myself at a point in my life in this total rut where I'd just taken on far too much. I thought I was being helpful. I thought people respected me and valued that. And many people did, but equally, a lot of people didn't and would just say, well, ask Julie to do that because she'll say yes. And they didn't truly value me for that. And that's one of the hardest but most important lessons I've learned was when she said to me, do you think people actually might not respect you because of that? And it really made me think in terms of when to say no, and when actually saying no was a far more important thing to say in terms of my own value and how I worked within a wider team.
The value of having an exec coach, explain that to people. Why have you always had this person in your life?
Very difficult to put a value on my executive coach because she has played such a phenomenal role in supporting me in my journey, and in asking me the difficult questions. And I think because I've known her and worked with her for such a long time, Kiki can ask me questions that probably nobody else can, that sometimes really make me stop and sting a bit actually. But I think because we've got that relationship, she knows that we can do that together and make me reassess things and make me be looking at what's in the future, what's next, what skills do I need to get, what sort of barriers and hurdles do I need to overcome to get there. And it's about, I don't have an exact roadmap as to what my career journeys look like. A lot of it's happened a bit through luck, a bit through judgment, but it's about putting myself in places where those opportunities are more likely to come up.
Mm-hmm. I know Kiki as well, so I know that she is priceless in so many ways.
She is priceless. That's the best way of putting it. Priceless.
And the theme of this, I guess, is something I was wanting to explore with you. The need to have that kind of external challenge and support. It can be priceless. Is it something you would advise people to seek out, whether it be a mentor or a coach?
Absolutely. And I think for me, I've got quite a vulnerable side to me, and it's a balance between, I think it goes back to when I was at school, I never won anything. I was never in the top set, the top team. So I kind of have had this thing inside me that at some point wanted to achieve and wanted to, I don't know, maybe it comes down to making my parents proud, although they probably say they always have been. And that's always had a sense of vulnerability with it. And I think what Kiki has done is help me take that vulnerability and make it a positive. And I think it links back to what we were talking about at the start of this interview as to what's happened over the last 50 odd days in terms of lockdown, in that I'm seeing people, what they might have described as vulnerabilities before, them talking about them, sharing them, and then actually realising it's not a vulnerability, it's just part of who I am. It's part of my makeup. Mm-hmm. And actually there's a lot of positives in that. I'm still always going to have some of those slight concerns and worries and self-doubt over things, and worrying about if I put myself forward for something, the fear of failure and not getting it. But I feel being able to actually talk about it, whether it's in private with an exec coach or a small trusted group of people, takes some of that pressure away from here and allows it to kind of dissipate.
Mm-hmm. And the key word there is trust, isn't it? So if people are thinking about seeking this external opinion, they really need to find people that they feel that trust with, because it's how you can bounce those ideas, knowing how they're going to be received.
Definitely. And I think where you are able to be in a position of having a mentor or a coach over a period of time, so they really get to know you and to get to know your drivers, for me, that's what's been so valuable about my own experience. But whilst I'm not a coach, I also feel really strongly about the role of mentoring. I'm actually quite bad as well at saying no to people when they ask if I'll mentor them, and I've got quite a lot of mentees. But do you know what? I will always make the time, because even if there is one little bit of advice that makes some difference, then I think, you know, I've got an absolute duty to try and share that and share some of my learnings and thoughts with other people.
That's a perfect lead on to my final wrap-up question. In terms of the theme of self-doubt, is there a key learning that you feel that you have shared over and over because it makes such a difference to moving forward?
I think it is exactly as you're doing in these interviews. It's being able to talk about it. When you first asked me to do this, my instant reaction, going back to my persona of I like to say yes, was yes, I'll do it. Then about half an hour after I'd emailed you, I thought, why did I agree to do that? I'm going to have to open up and talk about vulnerabilities and areas where I'm not always that comfortable. And, that's all a bit awkward. Can I not pretend I've got a diary clash and can't do it? And then there's this other part of me that's like, no, that's ridiculous. You know, the whole point is to talk about it. And so I think it is, and that's why I think what you're doing is great, is letting people talk, because everyone will have different experiences, different areas that create self-doubt for them. But it's about sharing it and knowing it's not just me. It's not just me that, you know, I was interviewing for a role in my team on Wednesday. I didn't sleep on Tuesday night because I was so worried that my kids were going to storm in at some point during the interview demanding help with some school project. But actually, if they had have done, would it really matter? Mm-hmm. Because in this new world, they're my kids. Everyone that knows me well knows all about Hector and Felix. It did cost me an awful lot of match attacks to bribe them to stay out. But, you know, that's the balance. And I will always have that sense of perfection and wanting everything to go as I'd planned it. But I think that's my big learning, particularly in the current situation. Perfection, certainty doesn't exist at the moment. And those of us that have some of those more perfectionist tendencies, which I sometimes do, we're having to learn to just breathe, just let a few more things go. And laugh about things. I mean, I've laughed about things that, you know, I wouldn't have done in the past. I'd have got very stressed or anxious about. And that's been another learning for how I've dealt with my self-doubt.
And it's fascinating to think, actually, we are potentially all going to emerge out of this much more resilient, capable people. Laughter is helpful in these mad times. Humour is vitally important. And you know, being able to look at ourselves with an extra lightness through this.
Definitely.
That's been fascinating. The themes that are really resonating in my head, Julie, are thinking about vulnerability actually as authenticity, thinking about how we can be calmer about things because actually it's just being human, and how actually it's helpful for people to perceive us in that way rather than it being a vulnerability to be perceived that way. Where are you finding joy during lockdown? What is it for you?
I'll just pick a couple of areas. I went back to work when my children were very, very young. In the week, this is the first time we ever as a family have had dinner together every night. We have lunch together now as well. And that is, I can't put a value on that. It's absolutely wonderful to have that time with my family. That I know when things go back to a different way, I won't have again. We play football together every evening at 7 o'clock. I don't think my shins are going to survive it if this goes on much longer. But we do things that we might have done, you know, on holidays or as a treat. We're doing them together every day as a family. And I think from a professional perspective, the positives that I've taken from it, and we've touched on it, I've got to know people that I thought I knew quite well. I've got to know them more from a human side. And I know that's a balance because some people are more private about their home life than others. But I feel I've built some relationships with people that are now based on greater shared values that actually will make working together and understanding not just where we agree on things, but where we differ on things. Understanding what the drivers are behind that make a difference in that. And I see that in particular, not just in my day job, but also in my role at Coastal Capital on the board there. I think when you're on a role on a board, you're not working with those colleagues around the table every day. You're coming together once a month or once every 6 weeks for a board meeting. And that can be quite a difficult way to build relationships. But actually, I'm finding, because we're having more quick calls, or we're having a call one-to-one with someone in the evening, and at the end people are saying, how are you? Not just, oh, how are you? They really care. How are your kids? That's broken down some barriers that weren't there intentionally before. And I feel, particularly with that board, I feel it's built an additional closeness that will serve us in really good stead for the role we will play in supporting the economy locally within this area go through what will be a really difficult period.
Well, you've almost stirred up a second interview there for me, Julie. I think that's fascinating. And really interesting with Enterprise N3. One of the things we found has been really successful for us as a board is when we have come together outside of the board. Because when you're there for a function and for a responsibility, that's a very different dynamic. And finding that opportunity to connect and understand people's drivers and passions and values is an amazing thing, because you're there for a purpose. And actually then when you understand that purpose from each individual human perspective, it makes the whole so much more effective. So what you said there, I kind of want to applaud at this end. Wonderful stuff. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for triggering off a whole other interview series in my head as well there. Keep safe, and we'll catch up again very soon. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Linda.